feel like the marriage course gave us the tools to have that good marriage.
It definitely gave me the tools to communicate, because I wasn't not very good at that, and also gave me the ability to kind of learn to listen.
We treat each other with respect whenever, wherever, and it just taught us that. I think to myself, there's times when people have children and they say, I wish it would have come with an instruction manual. And boy, wouldn't that be nice to have that with a marriage too. And I think that this class honestly can give you that instruction manual.
And the people that teach the course are just absolutely amazing individuals, and they deserve a pat on their back.
They do.
And the food's good too. Food's good.
Our first class, we left and we got in the car, and my husband looks at me and he says, I want to have a marriage like they have. I think there's always a time when you can always learn something. And I think if you're married a month, or you've been married 15 years or 30 years, it gives you those tools. And it reminds you of things like date nights and how important it is to cherish one another and take that time for each other. I've mentioned the marriage course to a lot of couples, and they get nervous. And it's more of, I looked forward to it because every Friday night I got to sit at the table with my husband with a little candle in front of us, and we had a wonderful meal, and we didn't have to fix the kids' plates, get them sit down, the water, the milk, everything else. It was alone time for us to learn and to teach each other and to communicate. I don't want people to be scared that it's some big marriage course where everybody's involved in your marriage, because it's not at all. You know, people always make their New Year's resolution to either lose weight or quit smoking, but I think more importantly is your marriage. Just going to this course, it just totally turned. And I think a lot of it was because we put God in our lives. It has totally changed our home life, our married life, and our personal lives.
Wow, that gets me kind of excited. Well, welcome to 2009. Turn to your neighbor and say, welcome to 2009. As we talk about this sacred journey that we feel God's calling us to here at Canyon View, it's often good to kind of look back over the previous year. And so as we look back at 2008, there was definitely many challenges that we faced individually and as a church, but there was great stories of God doing amazing things through Canyon View and in our personal lives. So I kind of reflected a little bit back, and some of the highlights that were in my mind were ShareFest back in last April, how 20 churches tore down their denominational walls and decided to join together and really serve our community. Man, that was an awesome weekend, wasn't it? And then this summer, we unfolded our new vision for Canyon View, E3, of encountering God, others, in the world. And many people, especially our staff, have really latched hold that this is the direction that God's calling us to as a church. And in response to that, we saw Paul and Linnea Watson with Tim and Elizabeth Nutting, that they ventured out and started the downtown campus. That's an extension of Canyon View, and they're having around 170 people a weekend there. And 60% of the people going to their church are new people. Isn't that awesome? And then we just stumbled onto that backpack program that we now are serving 4 elementary schools in our community and feeding hungry children and their families on the weekends. By the way, I just want to have a little side note there that our Serve and E department is looking for volunteers, especially champions that would take on one of the schools that we're serving, and that they would gather a team together to ensure that the backpacks are stuffed every week, that they're delivered to the schools, that particular school that they're servicing, and that they would be the people that would continue to develop relationships with the administration, the staff, and the students of that school, where it really is your ministry, that's what you're called to do, to serve that school and to reach out to the people in that school. So if any of you are interested in doing something like that, I think that would be a really exciting ministry. Contact the Serve and E desk when you leave here tonight, or contact Pastor Bob Clifford, and they could give you more information. So chew on that one. I think that's a great opportunity for someone that would really have a heart for that. And then, of course, there's the individual stories. We would be here all night if we could tell all the stories of the ways that God has changed your life in 2008. We have stories of hearts being transformed spiritually, of reconciliation of relationships that were severed are brought back together. We have divine healings that have happened, like having your Achilles tendon healed. I know someone very personally who suffered through that. And then we have stories of people that have experienced God in a more profound way. You know, Psalm 75:1, it says, "We give thanks to you, O God. We give thanks, for your name is near. Men tell of your wonderful deeds." And you know, I think it's great if you feel like your life has been impacted in any significant way in 2008 by God, to raise your hand. So you look around the room, look at all the people that have their hands raised. Now, I just want to make a special note for those of you that give on a regular basis to Canyon View, for those of you that serve and volunteer, for those of you that pray for the ministry of this church, there you see the fruit of your labor. So let's give God a hand for all the lives that have been impacted here. And we just give God all the glory for that. What a privilege to be able to be a part of this. And then, of course, there's the other side of the coin. There are people that are really struggling right now, that there's pain that you're enduring, and there's a loss of a loved one that has occurred over the last year. Some of you maybe have experienced a severing and breaking of relationships, and parents that have the pain of a child that has chosen another path and perhaps is rebelling against the values and the things that you've taught them growing up. That's an incredibly painful thing to go through, isn't it, as a parent? Then, of course, we have the economic downturn over the last quarter. Some of you might even be unemployed right now, and others, your businesses has taken a dramatic turn for the worse. And so when we face those kind of situations, we're just going, God, what is 2009 going to be like? But you know, one of the things that I don't know why God does this, but he chooses to use suffering in our life to bring about change in us. You know, sometimes I go, God, why do you have to use suffering so much? Why can't you use good things to bring change in me? Philippians 3:10 says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings. That's the kind of fellowship that I could do without sometimes. You know what I mean? Becoming like him in his death, and so somehow, I love how Paul says that, so somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. It's a mystery. We don't really know why God uses suffering and how he uses it, but when we go through it and we come out of the other side, we realize that God did something in us. He changed us somehow. So that's why Paul says to give thanks in all things. That there are those moments that we just say, God, I don't know what you're doing or why, but I'm just saying thank you, but I don't really feel thank you, but I'm following your word. And there's that pervasive question that looms out there for all of us is, what is 09 going to look like? As Ronnie mentioned, that looming question for all of us Bronco fans is, who will be the next coach for the Denver Broncos? And if you're a poor sap and you're a Raider fan like Ronnie, you're wondering, will the Raiders actually become a team that can make it to 8-8 for a season? What about the world's economy? Is it really going to recover? Or with a new change in leadership in the United States, with a new president, are we going to see a turn? Or is it the tip of the iceberg? Have we only seen the worst that's yet to come? We don't know. By the way, I just want to make a note there that 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 2 gives a mandate to us as followers of Jesus. And I want you guys to take this to heart, because I know that many of us come from different political sides, but here's where the bottom line comes of how we should respond to a new change of leadership in our country. It says, I urge then, first of all, that requests, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. So, for some reason, God chose to use the votes of our country to put our president in office that we will have inaugurated next week. Is it next week? A couple weeks. But God does call us to pray for the new leadership. We should be on our knees. If there was ever a time that we need to be praying for our leadership, it's now. Because of the things that he's facing with a war on 2 different continents, with the economy and the state that it's in, with all the upheaval of unemployment reaching a high and the fall of the financial markets, that man needs our prayers. All right? So can we commit to do that? God promises that so that we may live peaceful and quiet lives. What about the Middle East? We see an uprising of the ongoing conflict between the Hamas and Israel, and some of us are asking the question, is this the beginning of possibly prophetic end times of a conflict of biblical proportions? We don't know. And then, of course, we have the personal questions of the things going on in our lives with our health, with something that the doctor has told you in the last few weeks that has rocked your world, with people being laid off, with the downturn, as we've talked about in the economy. Those things are just pervasively in front of us. What is going to happen in 09? You know, when I sit and really think about these things, there's so much uncertainty going on right now. There are those moments where if I think about it too much, it's just like a brick hits me on the side of the head, and this anxiety can just overtake me. Have any of you experienced that? And the one thing I have to keep turning my focus on is God being in control of all things. You know, Ephesians 1:11 says, in him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will. And so in every situation that we're in, God's using it to work out his will. And a lot of times we don't understand how or why, but we have to trust that the sovereign God is in control of everything of our lives. And so as we look at 09 and we look forward to where we need to go individually and where we're going as a church, we're setting course, we're setting sail on an epic journey. I see this as a journey of discipleship, that God is calling us to a deeper level of discipleship, of learning to follow Jesus, learning to grow to know him, and learning to act as he calls us to act. You know, as we, again, looking back at 08 was a time with, admittedly, Jane and I coming here and taking over new leadership at the end of 07, that 08 was going, okay, who are we as a church? What is God calling us to? What is our vision and where he's directing us to? And then the last part of 08, we really felt God impressing on our hearts that the Spirit of God was leading us to establish his heart in the church. And establishing his heart is where God wanted to impress on us to break our hearts for the things that break his. That God was teaching us to be a people of compassion and to be a people of mercy. And when we have concern for the things of social justice and how to bring justice into a world that those are suffering of injustice, I believe that God gets our heart in the right place first. And then when our heart's in the right place, he can begin to speak into it. Now, the One Day to Feed the World campaign that we did the weekend before Christmas, I just wanted to report to you guys that this church very generously gave $43,500 for Convoy of Hope. That's incredible, isn't it? So if we do the math with what Convoy of Hope has been able to establish with their corporate connections, that translates into almost $500,000 worth of supplies for the poor, the needy, and the distressed in our country and in the world. Brian McLeese from Convoy of Hope, I talked to him and he says that will buy over 7 full shipping containers, jam-packed full of goods that they'll be able to ship into areas in crisis. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? That has made an incredible impact on the kingdom of God being able to advance in areas where people are in desperate need of God to step in and do something. So, you guys are awesome. I just can't believe how generous you guys are. You just continually, over and over, responding to God's call. So now, in the first quarter of 09, what I sense God calling us to, as I said, is now it's time to embark on our own personal spiritual journey. This is a journey where we're called to live and walk as disciples of Jesus Christ. Now, I looked up what disciple means. A disciple means that we're a learner. We're to learn. A disciple is another name for a scholar. And so the word means the pupil of someone. In contrast to the master or teacher, in Japanese culture, there's the sensei, and then there's the student. We are the students of Jesus, the sensei. That just becomes so clear to me when I say it that way. Matthew 10:24, Jesus said, "A student is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the student to be like his teacher and the servant like his master." So what it's saying here is a disciple implies that the person not only accepts the views of the teacher, but that he is also in practice an adherent. That's from the International Encyclopedia Bible Dictionary. Pretty impressive, huh? But the question is, how do we really become a disciple? In theory, we understand we want to become like Jesus, but what are the tools that are out there, should we say, programs that are out there to help us to become like Jesus so that we can embark on our own spiritual journeys? You know, one of man's greatest inventions is a map. Many of us guys have no idea what a map is. We're on a course to conquer and to find new territories on our own, aren't we? I think women do much better of looking at the map and finding a much direct course to where they need to go. This is kind of how I am. Some of you may already be understanding this, but this was back in the late 80s. I was a wilderness guide for Young Life's Wilderness Ranch. So we would take kids on these long backpacking trips in the wilderness areas of the Weminuche Mountain area down outside of Crete, Colorado. So here I am, I'm the head guide. I'm supposed to know where we're going. And we were on this route that we were going up what's called Little Squaw. It's a little valley where Little Squaw Creek was coming down. And we're walking up the valley, and there's this nice clear path, and so we're just walking up the path. The second day we get up, and we had to go over this ridge that dropped down into another valley. So we got all packed up, and we start walking on the path. And the ridge is up ahead of us, and the valley kind of curves to the right, which would be to the west because we're heading south. And so I'm continuing on this path, and Pat is a woman guide with me, and she says, "Kirk, did you look at the map?" I said, "I'm just following the path. Who needs a map?" And we're continuing walking. She goes, "Kirk, did you look at the map?" And I said, "No, because the trail's here. Who needs a map?" And so all of a sudden, way up on the ridge, we see this guy walking alone. He's going, "Hello, hello." We look up at him, and Pat goes, "I think he wants to say something to us." I go, "Okay." So we stop, and he comes gallivanting down the trail that was off to our left, and he goes, "Where are you going?" I says, "Well, we're going over Squaw Pass there." And he goes, "If you keep going on that trail you're going on, you're going to come to some rocky cliffs, and there's no way for you guys to get down. It's too dangerous for your group." And so Pat's looking at me like, "I told you to look at the map." So I get the topo map out, and sure enough, there's a trail that goes off to the left that this guy came down, that there was an easy saddle that we could go over. I said, "I knew that." And Pat goes, "What a knucklehead." You know, it was like this guy was an angel, that he just appeared out of nowhere and was directing us on the safe route to go. I think that there's a lot of us in our own personal lives that we're going through life trying to find our way, and we really don't look at the map. We have no direction where we're going. We're just kind of following the crowd, or we're using our own intuition that we think we know where we're going. But in reality, we often end up in places where we ask that question, "Oh my goodness, how did I end up here?" If we would follow God's map, we would end up in the place that God is calling us to. You know, it's kind of like a ship without a rudder. If you have a sailboat and you set course and you have a destination you want to get to, but you don't have a rudder, the sailboat is at the mercy of whatever direction the wind's blowing, right? James 3 talks about our tongue being like a rudder. It says, take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. It's a navigational instrument or tool that when you put the rudder in the water, you can steer the ship in the direction that you know you need to go, regardless of which direction the wind is blowing. The question is, who has control of the rudders of our life? I think the reality is that many of us think that we are in control of the rudder, but we don't know the course that we're supposed to go on. There are other people, you don't even have the rudder in the water. Jesus wants to be the rudder of our ship. And I think that in the Bible, we see many examples of where God has a specific call on people's life in a specific direction. And when people begin to follow God's direction, they begin to follow the blessing of following God's course and direction in our life. That's why being a disciple is so important, is because without being a disciple of Jesus, we miss out on his blessings. I want you to turn with me to Genesis 12. That's an easy book to find in the Bible. If you have an Old Testament, it's the first book of the Bible. And we're going to talk about a guy, at this time, his name is Abram. And it's interesting here in Genesis 12:1, it says, the Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Now, I was studying this today, and you know when you read the Bible and you read it in context of what's really happening, sometimes you see things that, oh, I never saw this before. But go back to verse 31 of chapter 11. This was interesting to me, but it may not be to you. But look at it. It says, Terah took his son Abraham. So Terah is Abram's dad. His grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram. And together they set out from Ur, which is in Iraq area, of the Chaldeans, to go to Canaan. So from the very beginning, Abraham set out with his dad to go all the way to Canaan, which is the area that is now present-day Israel. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Haran is actually in southeast Turkey. And so they kind of made it halfway. And as they went to Haran, Haran was a big center of commerce, an ancient city of central routes that would go through Haran, so a lot of trade and a lot of business in the area. And they probably just got comfortable. They said, life is good here, and they settled in Haran. Then it says Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. So after his father died, the Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. You see, Abram started on the journey with his dad. They settled in Haran. God later called Abram to finish the journey. And I thought about this, that many of us in this room, you are in church and you're wanting to be a good person, and you're kind of following the coattails of your parents or your grandparents. And so you're just kind of following the direction and what they've modeled to you. And some of you, you have kids now, and you're thinking, we need to get our kids into church, because if they're in church, then they'll get some good teaching spiritually and become better people. But a lot of us, we kind of settle there. We kind of get used to or comfortable with the status quo. It's kind of like, well, as long as we go to church at least once a month, we're good with God. But the reality is, God is calling each of us to set out on our own spiritual journeys. That He's calling us to go further. He's calling us to go deeper. Just like He did with Abraham, He says, I want you to go all the way that I called you to. He wants us to not get too comfortable in the Harans of our life. Romans 14:12 says, so then each of us will give an account of himself to God. So what God puts in our heart and what God calls us to in being disciples, we can't go off of what our parents did or what our grandparents did. We will answer personally to God. Now, John James knows this guy that we have a video of him interviewing him. And John told me about this guy. And here is a guy who gets it. And this is a very great, refreshing testimony. So let's listen to this testimony.
My name's Tim Herrera. I've been working with my brother on his music. He has a hip-hop band named Ill Fluent. I remember I told the band once, I said, man, I don't know the Bible perfect, but if you don't think